Hi everyone, good morning. So great to have you here with us today. I'm Melissa Mullen with Beck Technology's marketing team, and here today I have got Jon Bowser, Head of Development. Jon, how you doing?
Doing pretty well this morning.
Awesome,
Thanks.
good to hear it. So I'm here with Jon to talk a little bit about what goes on behind the scenes as the process in developing and estimating software like Destiny Estimator. Hopefully this gives our listeners some insight into why we do what we do and also encourages them to really take advantage of feedback sources such as our community page. So Jon, without further ado, I just want to dive right in. Developing software is definitely never an easy task. I've had conversations with you about things that you're working on, and it's just crazy to me how long it can take to develop something like, a simple click or something like that. And I think especially when it comes to developing a software that's dedicated to making estimates as accurate as possible. So what are some unique challenges to developing software for pre-construction that people might be kind of surprised to hear about?
So, when I think about it, they're unique, but they're not unique at the same time. I think one of the biggest challenges that we have is the same thing I think anybody anywhere in their career has. So, one thing I think we all take for granted is what we know today. Once you've established yourself in your career, you slowly start to forget everything you didn't know, when you came right out of school. I think it's fair to say that that pretty much applies to all of us. As a software engineer, you're taught how to write code, process problems, develop algorithms, all those things people typically think about when somebody says software engineer. But what they don't teach you in school is how do you apply all those things to a specific industry? Finance, aerospace, retail, pre-construction. They all have different problems. They all are trying to solve different things and accomplish different stuff. But they have no idea in school where you're going to go, so they can't really teach you about those things. And so that's really the biggest challenge for developing software for any industry, and pre-construction is really no exception to that. The upside is that the more you're exposed to the industry, the more you understand, and the better you apply that knowledge you gain in school along the way. Kind of the next biggest one I think is pretty closely related to that, but it's really approaching problems from the right perspective. Engineers are super smart people with mechanical, electrical software, all of those guys. They have a lot of tools in their toolbox for looking at problems, breaking it down, solving them. But sometimes it's really easy to get caught up in applying your own perspective to the problem and not really realizing that the world doesn't necessarily see the problem in the same way. So that's kind of how it goes back to better understanding the industry and the users.
So that's really interesting to me. Has there been a specific instance where you or your team was focused on something that you thought was a big issue in the industry, but then you went, boots on the ground, talked to some of our clients or some of the people looking at our software and realized that they were actually focused on something completely different?
So I wouldn't say that it's usually in like the big things. It's usually in the small things. So if you think about it from the software engineer's perspective, obviously the end feature doesn't just start out finished. There's a lot that happens from it doesn't exist to it does exist. And there's a lot of things that go between there around testing, making sure that the workflow looks and feels right. Things that as you're developing the software, you might run through this step 1,000 times. And you might all of a sudden start thinking, wow, the estimator is going to have to do this 1,000 times. I've got to change the way this thing works or change this workflow or make some tweaks to it. When in reality, it's like, actually, no, the estimator is only going to do this once or maybe 2 or 3 times. And so when you kind of lose sight of the fact that you're hitting, whether they're challenges or mouse clicks or workflow inefficiencies, a lot of the times you hit those in development and they're purely made up in a sense that you're still developing the way this is going to look and feel, and it's not really how the user's going to they're going to interact with it. And so
right, how they're actually going to
happens.
Okay, yeah, I hear that. Yeah, it's not always, they're not always going to apply it the way that you think they might. And I want to circle back. You talked about getting exposed to the industry, and obviously that's really the only way you can get to know an industry is dive in there, talk to the people who have been, working in it for years. Um, for people that join the development team as new software developers to Beck Technology, is there a process that you guys go through to help them get more of that exposure and get more of that face time?
Yep, and it's an ever changing process. So we're always trying to find better ways of doing it. We have this we have training material that our clients go through that we also send our developers through. We work with our services team to try to get hands-on domain exposure to the new hires, and even people who have been doing it for years. That always get exposed to something new. So working with our services team to better understand what our clients are doing, why they're doing what they're doing, why things are important, to kind of gain some of that domain knowledge. We go through training on LinkedIn or other LinkedIn Learning, I guess, or other learning tools and websites. We read books. We talk to users a lot. We've actually got a number of users who are so passionate about the industry and so passionate about helping people understand it, including us, that they'll take time out of their day to explain to us why they're doing what they're doing, why it's important, how it impacts their ability to do their job, how it impacts the world. We've also even had the opportunity to kind of embed ourselves, software engineers, as actual estimators on live jobs and participate in those workflows. So doing the takeoff, building the estimates, doing the bid leveling. So whenever we had those opportunities, we also try to run our engineers through that in real world exercises on real jobs that have real ramifications for things that go well and when we make mistakes.
Gosh,
So
that's intense.
it can be. You start to get you definitely start to get a sense of urgency, a sense of the pressure that an estimator is under, and I think that's one of the unique things about Beck Tech is we have that opportunity because we have such a close relationship with our clients that we're able to do those types of things that other software companies don't necessarily have. I think a lot of folk are able to talk to users, but how many can say they got in the trenches and actually worked on the live job with them?
Yeah, for real.
That's probably a pretty short list.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you. And I think, again, like you said, that's something that makes Beck Technology so unique is that desire for collaboration and that pursuit of working so closely alongside people who are actually in the field and using this software and working on these estimates. Are there, obviously client feedback is so critical to this process. You talk about getting developers to work on real world estimates. Are there other avenues that you guys use to bring in that client feedback or to provide clients with an avenue to offer that feedback to you guys?
We have a number of, I'll say, formal ways that people do it. Obviously we have our Beck Tech community. We have our support line. We have our services team constantly interacting. But aside from those kind of formal ways, I mean, really every touch point we have with a client is an opportunity to kind of get that feedback. And that feedback can range anywhere from I'm not sure how to do stuff to hey I got a challenge on how to make something happen, or maybe I'm running into an issue. Hey, or I've got some tweaking ideas on how to make things work a little bit better, or sometimes even just huge game changers. So there's very seldom a touch point, whether it's just through an email to support or talking with services or getting on the phone and just kind of seeing how things are going with the client where they haven't thought about how to make the product better for themselves and their team and even the industry. So I mean, for us, every touch point is an opportunity, despite the formal channels.
Yeah.
Like we are very much driven to make sure that we're doing right by the industry. We're moving the industry forward in a way that makes their life better and makes the world a better place for everybody. And so every chance we get to talk to somebody, whether it's boots on the ground or all the way to the top, just getting that feedback from them and how can we use that to make the product better.
Yeah, and I think that's so great. I mean, obviously, formal channels are definitely something that we need, but I love that you really touch on the fact that there's just this ongoing relationship with people in the industry to where, even a casual conversation that maybe started out as catching up turns into, this idea to reduce the time it takes to do an estimate by like 50% or something. Um,
And there's really kind of a big part to that relationship and communication as well. A lot of companies, that will have those formal avenues for receiving that feedback, and that's a lot of times the only touch point the client really has with, hey, I want the software to do X, Y, Z. Well, that's great. The problem is, I think we've all been in this boat where we've been working on something and we hit a challenge, whether it's an issue or a workflow or an inefficiency. We thought, man, if only I could do this, it'd be a lot better. Well, oftentimes when we make those kinds of decisions kind of in the heat of the moment, we're really just addressing a symptom and not the underlying root cause. So for us, by having that tighter relationship and not just these formal, rigid in your enhancement here, and then it'll make it in the software. By having that more constant interaction and communication with our clients and users, we're able to put the enhancement to the side for a little bit and just have the conversation about, well, what's really happening? What's the problem we're trying to solve? Why is this solution important to you? So for us, if we can really dive into that root cause, like what happened to get you where you're at now to where you need this new thing, we can better solve the problem. Instead of making a solution here, if we address something 4 steps back, it could be an even better solution than what was originally thought of. So by having that tighter communication, that better relationship, we can ultimately create a better solution and not just focus on the symptoms.
Yeah, that's such a great point, and I think it kind of ties into what you were talking about earlier, is to make sure that you're not getting lost in the weeds. Like you said, you hear about a problem and you can kind of have a knee-jerk reaction and you take care of the symptom, like you were saying, but maybe there's actually this whole way of doing things or processes that are inherently flawed that if you change those, then to your point, you can make something truly great and not just have, a temporary stopgap solution.
Right.
Um, speaking of, you brought up challenges, hitting roadblocks. Speaking of that, your team right now is in the process of getting out the latest version of Destiny Estimator during a pretty huge crisis that's impacting the way that a lot of our clients work. Have you hit like any unique roadblocks during this time, or?
I wouldn't necessarily say we've hit any roadblocks. I think compared to other industries, as developers, we already had processes in place for people to work from home, to work remotely. So for years, we've been able to kind of refine our processes, better utilize our tools, introduce new ways of communication to kind of really facilitate that remote environment. Now, this is the first time the entire company's gone remote, so we've hit similar challenges that I think really every other company out there's had, but we at least had a pretty good leg up in that, we at any given point in time, half of our development team may have already been working from home. So for us, it was just kind of doubling down on a process we were already doing. But I think the challenges we've hit around everybody being remote are fairly similar to what everybody else has. When you can't leave the house, for everything that's going on now, it's really easy to just, wake up, immediately go to work, and then, hey, next thing you know, it's 7 or 8 o'clock at night and you're still working. And so, you have to do things to make sure that you and your team aren't getting burned out, because, that kind of thing is just not sustainable. I mean, there are times when that's just necessary, but to live that day in and day out can definitely wear on you. The other part, which was I think the less obvious and more subtle one, is when you're in the office, you're having a lot of interaction with people that's not necessarily nuts and bolts. 100%. I'm typing away at a keyboard to solve a problem.
Right.
There's the softer personal side of things. We all have relationships within the office. We all have these personal connections with people that we see and interact with every day. And those interactions kind of can help break up this day where you would otherwise sit down at your computer at 7:30, 8 o'clock, and then not get up from your desk till 5:30 or something. And so without those touch points, it can be, again, really easy to get burned out. And even worse, you can kind of lose that culture that your company has built, that thrives on just that interaction with your team, those personal touch points. And so I think it's, for us, important to make sure that we're doing things to interject those personal touch points in our days, and not just having, hey Bob, I've got a question about such and such, but really making sure that we're still connecting with people on a personal level, knowing what's happening in their world and in their lives, and make sure they're doing okay. I mean, just having that water cooler chat, so to speak, just to make sure that we understand that we're all still people, we all still have emotions and feelings, and that we're not forgetting that.
Yeah, absolutely. I really love that you brought that up, because that's something that me personally, I appreciate so much about the company, is that not only do we care about our clients, but we also care about the people that we're working with, side by side. I know even in my case, like, you reach out to me several times a week and you're like, hey, like, what's up? Like, haven't heard from you in a bit. How you doing? And I appreciate that. Is that, like, do you have any other things that you do, like, on your own team to kind of help boost that morale, or keep that sense of, like, spirit going?
So, we have a number of development teams, and so most of them, they try to have once, maybe twice a week, this little 30-minute window of just, hey, let's put the keyboard down, and let's just kind of hang out, interact just like we would in the office. Maybe we're now condensing that all into a 30-minute window instead of scattering throughout the day, but it's stuff like that to kind of create this opportunity to kind of take a mental break and interact with each other. We even do the company activities as well. Like last Friday, we had the company happy hour.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Slash, what did Herman call it? Zoom Pictionary.
Zoom Pictionary. Yeah, yeah.
We broke into teams and did kind of did a Pictionary over Zoom. And so, I think as individual departments and as Beck Tech as a company, we're doing stuff like that to make sure we're engaging, and everybody's still kind of getting that camaraderie that we're used to having when we're in the office.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's so critical to being a productive, well-rounded employee as well. I feel like a lot of times I do my best work right after I get off, like, a team meeting with my department, because you're able to bounce those ideas off of each other, and maybe even pursue things that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise. I think we're kind of coming to the end of our conversation. So, just to wrap things up, what do you think is the most important thing for an estimator to understand about the development process, and maybe also vice versa? What's the most important thing a developer should know about an estimator's biggest priorities and their workflow?
Oh, that's a big one. So I think the biggest thing for an estimator to understand about the software engineering perspective of it is, we're going to ask a lot of questions, and honestly, sometimes the questions are just out of ignorance, and it's just making sure we understand and know why people are asking what they're asking, and how it's important. But it also does go back to, we want to make sure we're solving the right problem. We don't just want to just bolt something on that addresses the symptoms. So we're going to ask a lot of questions, and it can sometimes seem like we're just don't know what's happening or what's going on, but really it is us just trying to really dive into understanding the core issue. And then, for the software engineer, to understand the estimators, it's really looking at what are we creating, and making sure that we understand the problem we're trying to solve, and making sure that as we're creating it, that we're solving it in a way that makes sense for them. Engineers, estimators, everybody thinks differently. So what works in one person's workflow may not work for somebody else. So for us, knowing that we're building tools for the pre-construction industry, we need to make sure that when we are creating these solutions, we're approaching it from that lens, and to make sure that this makes sense for pre-construction, not for a software engineer.
Absolutely. And I love that emphasis on not everyone thinks the same way. Even in pre-construction, one estimating department may do things one way and another does one completely different, even within one company, if you have multiple offices within that company. And
100%.
so, yeah, I think it's great that you as a team are focused on bringing a tool that, not only is going to reduce efficiencies, but it's also focused on being something that is very flexible and that can adapt to what that specific department is doing.
Agreed.
And with all that said, I think that we are coming up on the end of our time. Did you have any last words before we sign off, Jon?
It's crazy out there. This is new for a lot of us, but hopefully, I don't think we're unique completely from everybody else, but hopefully, the things that we're doing, the ways we're processing stuff, hopefully that provides some additional food for thought for other people and help them move through their day.
Couldn't agree more with that. To those of you online, just want to let you know that we are going to be having another webinar next week, May 20th, 10 a.m. Wednesday. It's going to be around the evaluation process, specifically around evaluating software. That's my train of thought. And thank you guys again so much for being here with us today. We really appreciate it. Looking forward to seeing you next time. Thanks, Jon. Bye.
Thanks, Melissa.